Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with Forud, the son of Seyavash. Tus turned to his troops. Great fighters, destroyers of our enemies, I want an ambitious warrior who'll face this Turk in combat, who'll sever his head with a dagger, not bring it here to me. Rivniz, Tus' son-in-law, responded to the call. This battle would be his last. Bahram said to him, Champion, fear the Lord of the sun and moon, and don't rush into something that will dishonor you. If a knight rides out against the prince, he won't escape with his life. Tus was angered by Bahram's words, and he ordered a few warriors to ride up toward the summit of the mountain. But as they were leaving, Bahram called out to them, Don't think this will be an easy task. If Khosrow himself were on that mountain, and a hair of his is worth more than any hero. If anyone here never saw Seyavash's face, then let him ride up the mountainside to see it now. When they heard this, warriors returned to camp. But Tus' son-in-law, whom the heavens watched with scorn, took the way from Jeram toward Mount Sepid, his heart filled with furious longing for combat. When Forud caught sight of him, he readied his bow and said to Tuchva, Tus has treated my overtures of peace with contempt. The knight riding up toward me is not Bahram, and anxiety fills my heart. Watch him, and tell me whether you recognize him, and why is he clothed from head to foot in iron armor? Tuchva replied, This is Rivniz, the one brother among 40 sisters, all as lovely as the spring. He's deceitful, untrustworthy, a flatterer, but he's also a young and brave and Tus' son-in-law. Forud said, There is no time to be praising him when he's about to fight me. As soon as he gets closer, I'll send him back to his sister's skirts. If he feels the wind of my arrow and lives, no longer count me as a man. Now, should I shoot at his horse or at him? You're experienced at this. What do you advise? Tuchva said, Shoot at the rider and let Tus grieve for him. Tus knows that in the goodness of your heart you offered him peace, but he's foolishly decided to make war on you, and in so doing he shames your brother. When Rivniz was a bowshot away, Forud drew back his Indian bow and loosed an arrow of poplar wood, which pierced the knight's helmet, pinning it to his skull. He fell, and his horse turned, dragging Rivniz's head in the dust. Tus was watching from the heights in Mayhem, and when he saw this, the mountainside blurred and darkened before his eyes. But as the wise say, an evil nature is repaid in kind, not once, but many times. Then Tus said to Zarasp, Make your heart bright as fire, put on your knight's armor, exert yourself and avenge our fallen champion. If you do not, I see no one who will. Zarasp prepared for combat and placed his helmet on his head. His heart was filled with a longing revenge, and his head whirled with impatience. The lion warrior said to Tuchva, Another rider is coming. Look, and see if you recognize him. Is he a prince or one of the common soldiers? Tuchva replied, This time has come to fight in earnest. This is Tuch's son, Zarasp, who won't turn his horse aside from a raging elephant. He is married to one of Rivniz's sisters, and has come to avenge his brother-in-law. As soon as he can make out your helmet, loose an arrow against him so that this crazy commander Tus will realize we're not to be despised. Forud urged his horse forward, and as he did so loosed an arrow towards Zarasp. It pierced the armor at his waist and entered his body. Blood flowed from the wound, and his soul departed. He fell from his horse, turned, and galloped back to camp. A great cry went up from the Persian army, and Tus wept with rage and anger and grief. In haste, he pulled on his armor, lamenting for the 2 dead warriors, and shaking like a leaf. Like a mountain, he sat in the saddle, as if he were astride some great elephant, then grasped the reins and set off towards Forud, his heart filled with a longing for revenge, his head whirling with grief and pain. Teshva cried out to Forud, "A moving mountain approaches our mountain. It's Tus, their commander, who's come to fight against you in combat. You should not pitch yourself against an experienced monster like this. Get into the castle and bar the gates, and then we'll see what fate decrees. Now you've killed his son and son-in-law. You can't expect a friendly welcome from him." Forud was young and flared up against Teshva, saying, "When battles are to be fought, whether it's against Tus or a raging elephant or a ravening lion or a sea monster or a tiger man, give himself to combat heart and soul. He doesn't start smothering the fire with mud." Teshva, in his experience, said, "Princes do not despise good advice. Even if you were made of iron and could rip a granite mountain up by its roots, you're still only a solitary knight. If 30,000 Persian warriors came up this mountain to fight against you, not only your castle but the very stones of this mountain will be razed, and not a jot will survive. And the expedition to avenge your father's death will suffer a setback that will never be reversed." But he did not say what should have been said long before, and following the advice of this worthless counselor, Forud gained only war and death. The prince tugged at the reins, turning his horse toward the castle, and notched another arrow to his bow. With Forud's castle walls were 80 female attendants. They were watching from the battlements, and when they saw the young hero turn back, their spirits sank. Teshva addressed Forud, "If you're determined to oppose Tus, it's better that you don't destroy him. Kill his horse beneath him, because a Persian prince won't fight on foot, even if hard-pressed. And then one arrow might not finish him. His henchmen are certain to follow him up the mountain. You have never faced his fury, and you can't deal with both him and them." Forud heard him, and drew back his bow. The arrow struck Tus's horse, which lowered its head and fell lifeless to the ground. In rage, Tus made his way on foot back down the mountain, his shield slung around his neck, his body caked in grime. Forud yelled taunts at him. "What happened to the great champion, then, who runs away by foot from a single horseman? What kind of a show does that make in front of his army?" The women on the battlements laughed, and Bahram re-echoed with their scornful cry. The old man ran from the young hero's bow, straight down the mountain, quick as he could go. When Tus reached the base of the hillside, warriors clustered about him. "You've come back safe and sound, and this is no time for tears." But Jiv turned aside, ashamed to see his leader return on foot. He said, "This young man has gone too far. If he's a prince and wears the earrings of his office, how can he treat our great army so contemptuously? We're not here to agree to whatever he wants to propose. Even if Tus was hasty and overbearing, this Forud is making a mockery of our mission. We came here to sacrifice our lives in a war of vengeance for Seyavash. We should not forget this. Forud has destroyed Zarasp, a great knight, descended from Noza, and he left Rivniz' body weltering in its own blood. What further humiliation are we waiting for? Even if he were Jamshid's son and had Kobid's brains, he still embarked on the course of an ignorant fool." As he spoke, he fastened on his armor. He mounted his horse, which was like a mighty dragon, and set off towards Bahram. When Forud saw him, a cold sigh escaped his lips, and he said, "This army has no sense of its luck, good or bad. One after another they come, each braver than the last, shining like the moon and the sun in Gemini. But this is not a wise course, and a head without wisdom is like a body without a soul. If they aren't victorious, I fear for their war of vengeance, unless Khosrow comes to Tehran, and then he and I will stand shoulder to shoulder in this war for our father, and crush our enemies like dirt in a fist. Now tell me, who is this haughty warrior over whose weapons they will weep?" Teshva looked down the mountainside, and, unaware of the effect of his words, was like one who sows thorns in a meadow. He said, "This man is a terrible dragon whose breath can bring birds down from the sky. He has destroyed 3 armies from Tehran, orphaned innumerable children, crossed mountains, rivers, and deserts, deprived countless fathers of their sons, and placed his foot on the neck of slain lions. It was he who took your brother to Aran, getting him across the Oxus when no boat could be found. His name is Jiv, and he's a mammoth of a man, a raging flood in battle. No arrow will pass through his breastplate. He wears Seyavash's armor when he fights, and fears neither lances nor poplar wood arrows. Shoot your arrow at his horse, and see if you can wound that. Then I'll have to dismount and go on foot back to camp, as Tess did, his shield slung about his neck. Forud drew back his bow, and the arrow flew, piercing the horse's chest. Jiv toppled from his collapsing mount and began to make his way back to the mountain. A laugh of derision went up from the battlements, and Jiv seethed with chagrin beneath their taunts. The Persian warrior went to him, saying, "Thanks be to God it was your horse that was wounded and not you." But his son, Bahram, who was a headstrong youth, railed against him. "My father's a conqueror of lions. He's outfaced raging elephants. So why did a single horseman make you turn tail like this? You always used to be the thick of the fighting. Now, because your horse is wounded, you run off like a drunkard?" Jiv said, "When my horse was wounded, I'd no choice but to quit the field," and then angrily reproached Bahram for his presumptuous remarks. Bahram turned his back on him. Jiv exploded in rage and struck at him with his horsewhip, shouting as he did, "Haven't you been told you should think before you're picking a quarrel? You've neither sense nor brains nor wisdom. My curses on whoever brought you up." Bahram's heart was filled with bitter fury, and he swore a solemn oath before God that he would not take saddle from horse until either he had avenged Zarasp or died in the attempt. He went to Gostaham, his heart filled with grief, his mind with rage. He said, "Lend me a horse that can ride up the mountain. I'm going to put my armor on and show just who is a man and who isn't." A Turk has installed him on that summit, a full view of the army. If we leave here, there will be a lot of hard riding to do, and I've only 2 horses that can carry a man in full armor. If one of them is killed here, I'll never find his equal, either in speed, strength, or endurance. Gostaham replied, "This is not sensible. You should not go rushing into disaster. Think of Zarasp, Rivniz, our matchless leader Tuss, your father, who brings down lions, all of them seen off by this Turk. No one can defeat that granite mountain and enter the castle unless he has vultures or Homa's wings." Bahram said, "Don't break my heart. I'll tear myself limb from limb if I don't do this. I've sworn by the moon, by God who holds this world, and by our sovereign's crown, that I'll not come down from that mountain till I have avenged Zarasp, or am slain like him." Gostaham replied, "This is not the road you should be taking. Wisdom knows nothing of such fury." Bahram burst out, "Then I shall go on foot to avenge Zarasp. Keep your horses." And Gostaham said, "I would not have one hair of your beard harmed. I've 100,000 horses, their tails braided with royal jewels. Choose one and have him saddled, and if he's killed, so be it." He owned a splendid horse, swift as a wolf, lean-bellied, tall and eager for combat. Bahram, filled with youth's ambition, had him armored with barding. But when he thought of Forud's prowess, Jiv's heart was thrown into anxiety. He called Gostaham to him, and they talked about the youth's impetuous fire. He sent back with him Seyavash's armor and royal helmet. Gostaham gave him to Bahram, who put them on as quickly as he could, and set off in high spirits, accoutred as a mighty warrior up Mount Sepid. The young prince turned to Chochva. "Another of their men is coming. Look there, and tell me the name of this young chieftain for whom they'll soon have to weep and wail." Touchful replied, "Iran has no warrior like him. He's Jiv's only son, and his father loves him more than his wealth and his own soul. He's a brave champion. victorious as a warrior, and victorious as a lion. Again, shoot at the horse. You must not break the Persian king's heart by killing this lad. Anyway, he too is wearing the armor that Jiv wore, and it's proof against arrows and lances. He's likely to fight you on foot, and you won't be his equal then. Look at that sword he bears, glittering like diamonds." Forud loosed an arrow at Bizen's horse, which fell as lifeless. Bizen disentangled himself from his falling mount and began to climb to the summit, his drawn sword in his hand. He shouted to Forud, "Courageous knight! Wait where you are and see how lions fight. Know that this unhorsed warrior won't turn back, but sword in hand I'll climb your mountain track. Wait for me. Face me man to man, and then see if you ever want to fight again." When he saw that Bizen was not withdrawing, Forud shot an arrow at him, but Bizen lifted his shield and harmlessly deflected it. He reached the summit and readied his sword. Forud retreated, and the battlements began to ring with shouts. Bizen ran after him, and with his sword hacked at the barding of Forud's horse. He pierced it, and the horse fell in the dust. Forud scuttled into the gatehouse of his castle, and the sentinels immediately barred the gates behind him. Those on the battlements hurled rocks down at Bizen, knowing that no time would be lost. Bizen yelled back, "You were mounted and ran away from a man on foot. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Where's your courage and fams now, Forud?" When Bizen got back to Tus, he boasted, "My lord, that knight could humiliate a whole plain of full soldiers. You shouldn't be surprised if the hail of his arrows turned to a granite mountain to water. There's no greater fighter anywhere." Tus's response was to swear an oath of vengeance, saying, "I'll razz his castle, and see the dust of its ruins obscure the sun. I'll fight a battle for the range and revenge of Zarasp, and destroy that malignant Turk. I'll make the stones of his castle glisten like coral with his blood." When the shining sun disappeared and dark night spread its army across the sky, 1,000 horsemen entered the castle of Kalot as reinforcements. The gates were fastened behind him, and the night was filled with the sound of ornaments and the bells of their horses' gear. Jariere, Forud's mother, slept at her son's feet, and the darkness was filled with pain and sorrow for her. She dreamt of a great fire that raged in their castle, and then spread until the whole mountain was a mass of flame, which consumed the castle and all the women in it. She started up from her sleep, her soul in anguish, and went on the battlements to gaze out on the world. She saw all the mountain filled with the glitter of spears and armor, and ran weeping to Forud, saying, "Wake up, my son. The stars have turned against us. All the mountainside is thronged with our enemies, and their spears and armor threaten our gates." The young prince said, "Dear mother, do not cry. If fate has willed that I am soon to die, your weeping will not make my death delay. Each man must leave on his allotted day. My father, too, was young when he was killed. Now I must bow to what the heavens have willed, as he is put to death by Gorisa. So this Bizen intends to murder me, but I will fight. If I'm to die, I'll slaughter all who attack, and I'll not beg for quarter." He distributed helmets and armor to his men, and then he placed a helmet on his own head, tightened the belt about him, his roomy armor, and grasped his royal bow. When the shining sun rose into the sky's vault, the war cries of chieftains rang out on all sides, mingling with the clatter of heavy maces and the din of drums, bugles, fifes, and Indian chimes. Forud left the Turkish troops out from the castle, and the top of the mountain was so clogged with dust, arrows, and maces that it seemed like a sea of pitch. The ground had disappeared. There was hardly room to fight, and the rocks and precipitous mountain slopes alarmed the horses. Battle was joined, and as the sun journeyed across the sky, Forud's army steadily lost ground. On the heights and in the gullies the Turks were killed. Fortune was against the young man, although he himself still fought like a lion, and the Persians watched him in wonder. But when he saw that all his companions had been killed, and that he could not fight on alone, he tugged at the reins and turned and fled up the mountain to his castle. Roham and Bizan lay in ambush for him, and as he approached, Bizan appeared on horseback in front of him and bore down on him. As soon as he saw Bizan's helmet, Forud readied his mace, but as he did so, Roham rode out of ambush behind him, yelling his war cry, an Indian sword in his grasp. He struck a mighty blow that caught Forud on the shoulder, severing his arm and rendering him unfit for battle. Forud groaned with pain and urged his horse forward. He reached the castle gate, which were slammed and bolted behind him. Jawriri reached to him and took him in his arms, and she and their attendants bore him to the ivory couch. At the hour of his death, he was still too young to have worn the crown. His mother and the women cut off their musky tresses, and Forud struggled for life while wailing surrounded his couch, and anguish filled the castle. Barely opening his eyes, Forud said, "It's right for you to mourn. The Persians will come now, intent on plunder. They will enslave you, razz my castle and its ramparts to the ground. Those of you who pity me, whose faces burn for my sorrow, go to the battlements now, and cast yourself down from them, so that not one of you remains for Bizan to boast of. He it is who has taken my life from me, who has destroyed me in the days of my youth." After he had said this, his cheeks turned sallow, and in pain and grief his soul departed. The women folk fled to the battlements, and all of them threw themselves down on the rocks beneath. Jawriri set fire to the castle and fed it with their treasures. Then she went to the stable and with the sword slashed the remaining horses' bellies and lacerated their legs, and the horses' blood splattered her face. Lastly, she made her way back to where Forud lay. She drew a dagger from the folds of his clothes and ripped open her belly with it. She placed her face against her son's and died. The Persians had torn up the gatepost and poured into the castle, intent on plunder. But when Bahram came on Forud and Jawriri, his heart broke with grief. Weeping, he turned to the Persian troops and said, "This man has died even more wretchedly and terribly than his father did. Seyavash was not killed by a mere squire, and his mother did not die beside him. Neither was his castle burned like a reed bed, nor his chattels and treasures destroyed. Fear God, my friends, and the turning of heavens, whose arm is long in apprehending evildoers, and who is merciless to sinners. Have you no shame before Khosrows, who spoke so gently and at such length to Tus, who sent you here to avenge the death of Seyavash, and who gave you such wise counsel? When he learns of his brother's spilled blood, you will lose all favor with him, and what good can be expected from men like Roham and that hothead Bizan?" Meanwhile, Tus and his entourage of Persian chieftains, including Gudaz and Jiv, made their way up to the mountainside to Kalat, the war drums sounding as they came. Entering the room where Forud and his mother lay dead, they saw Bahram seated beside the bodies, weeping and lamenting, and Zanga to one side, a group of warriors clustered about him. Forud lay on the ivory couch like a toppled teak tree, his fair face as full as the moon, and it was as though Seyavash himself lay there, asleep in his armor. Gudaz and Jiv and the other warriors wept to see him, and Tus, too, wept bloody tears, both for his son and for Forud. Gudaz and Jiv and the others there turned on him and said, "A commander should not act hastily, and rage ruins all he does. Through rage and haste you have torn and thrown this young prince with all his splendor and nobility to the winds, and the same passions destroyed both Rivniz and Zarasp, who counted Neza among their ancestors. Without wisdom, ability, and rage together are like a sword eaten away by rust. Tus ordered that a royal tomb be built on the mountaintop. Within it, on a golden couch, they placed the prince's body dressed in cloth of gold with a golden belt. His head was embalmed with camphor, and his body with rosewater and musk. The tomb was sealed, and the army moved on. So passed this lion-hearted prince. After Forud's death, Tus led the Persian army deep into Turan, and Afarzab's counselor, Piran, was put in charge of Turan's defenses. Success had made the Persians careless, and Piran was able to inflict a severe defeat on them by ambushing them at night. Khosrow eventually heard of Tus's insubordination in attacking Forud, and of his army's defeat at the hands of Piran. He angrily recalled Tus and appointed Feroborz as commander in his place. But the Persians suffered defeat again, and the remnants of their broken army fled back toward Iran. Turan allied itself with other Asian peoples and nations, including China, in the hope of finally defeating Iran. Rostam began to intervene in the conflict and betied the battle and turned it into Iran's favor. Afarzab and his allies were routed, although Afarzab managed to escape again, and the border areas between Iran and Turan were once more under Persian control. At this point, Rostam, who could now move about Turan more or less at will, encountered a notorious demon, the Akvan Div. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more stories, many more. Until then, my friends,